Good morning, students. On Saturday, we saw how the Rome in Roman Empire, how the slaves were working and the kind of role they played in the mainstay of the Roman Empire and the Roman economy, that was agriculture. And yes, we also read that the accounts where the working in the fields was extremely difficult and strenuous. So the slaves definitely did not have a great time working there. But students, you also have to understand one very important fact. Now, what is that important fact? That important fact remains is that agriculture has never been an easy job. Do you think even today, after that is, we are talking about 2,000 years almost after Roman civilization, do you think even today farming is an easy job? In spite of all the technology which you have in terms of tractor and tube wells and all those fertilizers and insecticides and pesticides, do you still think farming is an easy job to do? It is not. You have to leave field at 6 o'clock in the morning. Even today, even if you own the same land, if the land could be yours, even when you're not working as a slave, you leave for 6:30 in the morning for your field, and you return only around sunset. And throughout the day in that sweltering heat and sun, you have to work, right? So farming was never an easy job. You can ask how many children of even today, even how many children of farmers actually want to become farmers. They don't, because it is a very very tough assignment. It's unlike the fancy jobs of today where you work in air conditioned offices and all those blue collar jobs, and then malls which are centrally air conditioned, your cars are air conditioned. So naturally no one wants to become a farmer even today. So you can understand the situation that must have prevailed and existed 2000 years ago. So of course it reads definitely that anyone working in the slaves had a very hard time. But then, and that's what my argument is, anyone who would have worked in the fields in those times and even today has a very hard time, because farming is not a fancy job. And you have to understand that till about 400 years ago, almost 80% to 85% of the global economy depended on agriculture. Whichever civilization you would like to talk about, and whichever continent, right, from Africa to Asia to North America to South America, Chinese civilization, anywhere, wherever, it was all about agriculture. The whole economy moved around agriculture. So naturally, you have to work in the fields. Where else would you? Everyone couldn't have been a goldsmith or an ironsmith, for that matter. It was a tough job and it was a tough life to actually live. Students, 1 minute. So now today we look into the topic of yes, social hierarchies. Now again, I can see this yes, the frontier city of Dara. The late fifth century emperor Anastasius built the eastern frontier city of Dara in less than 3 weeks by attracting labor from all over the east by offering high wages. Now, students, this city called Dara is is very important. It was a fort city. Basically, it was very important militarily or strategically, because Dara used to be, of course, controlled by the Romans, but it was right on the border between the Roman Empire and the Persian Empire, that is the Iranian Empire. So strategically, it was very very important location. A lot of soldiers of Roman Empire used to be stationed here. Now, coming to social hierarchies, yes, always remember that this Dara is a very famous town historically, you would often come across this term. Now, social hierarchies. Let us stand back from the details now and try and get a sense of the social structure of the empire. Tacitus described the leading social groups of the early empire as follows: the senators, and that is the members of the equestrian class. Students, yeah, senators, of course, the ruling aristocracy. The ruling aristocracy has always been important. In class 10, you had study about the nationalism in Europe chapter, where you read actually the aristocracy in France. That was also so important. Uh, and with enormous amount of influence and enormous amount of privileges and power and wealth, of course. And that was exactly the class which never paid the taxes, and that fueled a huge amount of resentment against them, and that's why the common people rose up, and then there was a French Revolution. So this segment of the population has always been, in whichever civilization or culture you talk about, they had always been important. Whether as senators, or whether as the barons, or the counts in Europe, whatever might be the name. So, by late empire, which starts with the reign of Constantine the First in the early part of the fourth century, the first two groups mentioned by Tacitus, the senators and the equites. Now, who were equites? Now, here it is the knights or the horsemen were traditionally the second most powerful and the wealthy group. You can actually remember that again when you talk about when you read about the French civilization, even there you used to read about the knights. Yes, the important military generals who also commanded enormous amount of respect and privileges. So they have always been the fighting class, that is, they have always been important, even in India for that matter. When you talk about our traditional Indian culture, you have Brahmins, that is the top one and the topmost in the hierarchy, and immediately after them there is the Kshatriyas, that is the people who battle it out on the battlegrounds. Yes. So the middle class is now consisted of the considerable mass of persons connected with imperial service in the bureaucracy and army, but also the more prosperous merchants and farmers, of whom there were many in the eastern provinces. Students, you have to understand that it was only in the 17th and the 18th century that the middle class actually started coming um, from the factories, and the whole culture and the whole thing about manufacturing industry. The middle class, it was only then that the middle class started coming around the manufacturing industry. But for hundreds and hundreds of years, it was the middle class used to come around from these backgrounds. That is, these were the places they used to work, for merchants, the traders. Those were the areas where they used to work. Now, um, and yes, how important trading was for the Roman Empire, it becomes very evident. um, and now they comprised a rural labor force, of which were permanently employed in large states, workers in industrial and mining establishments, migrant workers who supplied much of the labor for the grain and olive harvests, and for the building industry, self employed artisans who, it was said, were better fed than wage laborers, and large mass of casual laborers, especially in the big cities, and of course the many thousands of slaves that were still found all over the Western Empire in particular. Students, you have to understand, because Roman Empire was a huge and a vast empire. Now, everyone who used to that is a major part of the workforce, of course, came from slaves, but everyone was not a slave, right? There were also a huge amount of floating population, which was free to go wherever it wished, and it went wherever it saw that they have a great opportunity of working and making a decent standard of living for themselves and for their children, and the wife and the family. So that was a floating population, and they would go wherever they felt that their labor would be most respected, and in terms of financial gains and the working conditions, of course. And naturally, um, even today, like you see, now we are watching on television that people from Bihar and UP, all of them working to work in the major cities and towns of India. So it was no, the situation was no different. And this is the whole human behavior. It is not just a, you can call it a Roman behavior or the Indian behavior. It is a human behavior. You go where you feel the working conditions are good, you have better opportunities of prospering and developing in life. And the same thing was happening even in the Roman civilization, where people used to be attracted from all the different geographies. They would like to go and work uh, in the areas where they felt that yes, they would be getting a better deal. And so do not be under that impression that all that was happening in the Roman Empire and all the workforce was all slaves and slaves and slaves. No, people were free as well, right? People still enjoyed free will. People were free, right? uh, Now, one writer of the early 5th century, the historian Olympiodorus, who was also an ambassador, tells about the aristocracy based in the city of Rome drew annual incomes of up to 4,000 pounds of gold from their estates, not counting the produce they consumed. Guys, 4,000 pounds of gold would be around 2,000 kilograms of gold. You can just imagine. So that is how wealthy the the wealthy class of Roman Empire was, because there was so much of trade happening. There was so much of there were so many people under that empire. It was not just that they ruled over vast geographies, students. It's no point if you rule over if you can claim that I am the ruler of the Sahara desert. No point, because no one lives there. So you would still remain probably a beggar, yeah, right, or a poor man for that matter. But then they used to preside over vast geographies, yes, but also huge number of people. So there was enormous amount of trade happening. There was enormous amount of manufacturing happening, production happening. So there was a whole buzz. There people had their demands. All of that needed to be met. People from different segments of population, different economic status. So all of that was around. Now, the monetary system of the late empire broke with the silver based currencies in the first centuries because the Spanish silver mines were exhausted and the government ran out of sufficient stocks of the metal to support the stable coinage in silver. Constantine the First founded the new monetary system on gold, and there were vast amounts of this in circulation throughout late antiquity. Very interesting, students. When people ran out of silver, they started making coins made of gold. In common sense, things, you would think that yes, once you run out of gold, probably you start minting coins made of silver. But the opposite happened in the late Roman Empire, whereby once they ran out of silver, they started minting coins of gold. We shall continue tomorrow. Thank you.